The first insult didn't happen at my son's wedding. It happened long before that, quietly, casually, in a way that made it easy to dismiss if you wanted to. But I didn't dismiss it. I remembered it. Before I tell you about the moment the music stopped, before I tell you what my son did that left an entire room frozen in silence, you need to understand how this all began. Because what happened at that wedding wasn't sudden. It was earned, slowly, carefully, over time. I was 62 years old then. A widow. I lived alone in a modest house in a town where people still wave when they drive past and neighbors bring food when someone is sick. I dressed neatly, drove the same sensible car I'd owned for years, and never corrected anyone when they assumed my life was simple. It made people comfortable, and when people are comfortable, they reveal themselves. Before I go on, let me pause for just a moment. If you're listening right now, tell me in the comments which city or country you're listening from. And if stories like this matter to you, stories about dignity, family, and quiet strength, you can subscribe so you don't miss the next one. My son Tyler was my only child. I raised him alone after his father passed, and I raised him with intention. I taught him to be respectful, to notice how people treat those who can't offer them anything, to understand that kindness and weakness are not the same thing. When Tyler told me he was getting married, I was genuinely happy. He sounded hopeful in a way I hadn't heard in years. He talked about the future again. I wanted to believe that meant something good. Her name was Jessica. The first time I met her, she smiled often, but her eyes didn't soften. She asked questions that sounded polite but carried weight, questions about my house, about whether it was difficult to maintain at my age, about what my plans were for the future. Not curious questions, evaluating questions. Her mother, Patricia, was more direct. She had perfected the kind of smile that lets you know she's already placed you somewhere beneath her. The kind of smile that doesn't expect a response. The first time they came to my home, Patricia stood in my living room, glanced at the furniture, and said almost kindly, "You've done well given your circumstances." Given my circumstances, I remember nodding. I remember offering coffee. I remember letting the moment pass, not because it didn't sting, but because I was learning. From that moment on, I paid attention. Not to what they said when they were trying to impress people, but to what they said when they thought I didn't matter. They talked about family standards, about support systems, about how lucky Tyler was to be welcomed into their world, and slowly, subtly, the message became clear. I was expected to stay quiet, to stay grateful, to stay small. When the engagement was announced, everything moved fast. The venue was chosen without asking Tyler. The guest list was expanded without consulting me. Every decision came from Jessica's family, framed as generosity. Tyler's role was to agree, mine was to smile. At one dinner, Patricia leaned across the table and said, "We understand not everyone can contribute equally. It's important to know your place." She said it gently, as advice, as kindness. Tyler went silent after that. I noticed the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his smile faded just slightly. Later that night, he asked me if I was okay. I told him I was fine. I told him not to worry. That was another mistake they made, assuming reassurance meant surrender. What they didn't know was that I wasn't staying quiet because I lacked options. I was staying quiet because I was observing patterns. I saw how Jessica laughed when her mother made comments about money. I saw how Patricia spoke about people who weren't in the room. I saw how control was disguised as concern, how generosity came with invisible strings. And I saw how my son was slowly being taught that he should be grateful for treatment that diminished him. The closer the wedding came, the bolder they became. Comments about my clothes, about how simple my life was, about how lucky Tyler was to be marrying into something substantial. They never asked me what I thought. They never asked what I knew. They never imagined that the woman they were quietly dismissing was paying attention to everything. By the time the wedding day arrived, they were confident, comfortable, certain of their place in the hierarchy they'd created. They believed the day would be about celebration, about status, about showing the world who mattered. They didn't realize it would be the day their masks slipped. They didn't realize it would be the day my son stopped being silent. Because the insult they planned to whisper, the one they thought would go unnoticed, was about to be heard by the one person they never expected to stand up. And once he did, there would be no way back. The week before the wedding, I started to notice something change in my son. It wasn't dramatic, no arguments, no confrontations. Just small shifts, longer pauses before he answered questions, a new heaviness behind his eyes, the way he'd stop mid-sentence as if reconsidering whether something was worth saying out loud. Tyler had always been observant, but now he was quiet in a different way. One evening he came over for dinner, just the two of us, no Jessica, no planning talk. I made his favorite meal out of habit, and we ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then he asked, "Mom, do you ever feel like people think we should be grateful for things that don't actually feel right?" I didn't answer immediately. When your child asks a question like that, you don't rush, you let them hear themselves think. "I think," I said carefully, "that gratitude should never require you to shrink." He nodded slowly, like the words had been waiting for him. He didn't say Jessica's name, he didn't mention her mother, but I knew exactly who he was talking about. As the days passed, the pressure around the wedding intensified. Jessica's family controlled everything. Schedules were dictated. Seating arrangements were finalized without consultation. Tyler was expected to show up, smile, and agree. When he hesitated, Patricia framed it as concern. "We just want what's best for you," she said more than once. "You'll understand once you're fully part of the family." Fully part of the family, what she meant was obedient. The rehearsal dinner was held at a venue chosen for its exclusivity. I wore a simple dress. Not because I couldn't afford something else, but because I wanted to see how they treated me when they believed I had nothing to offer. They didn't disappoint. Patricia introduced me to her friends as Tyler's mother, nothing more, no name. No story, just a role. Jessica smiled through the evening, but her patience thinned as the night went on. When I complimented the flowers, she said, "They're imported. Local ones just didn't feel appropriate." Appropriate. Everything with them came back to that word. Later that night, as guests were leaving, I overheard Patricia telling someone, "Some people just don't know how to carry themselves in certain spaces." She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. Tyler heard it too. I saw his jaw tighten. I saw the moment register. Still, he said nothing. Not yet. The night before the wedding, Tyler called me late. His voice was low, uncertain. "Mom," he said, "if tomorrow feels wrong, would you want me to say something?" That question told me everything. It told me he was already standing on the edge of a decision. It told me he was torn between loyalty and truth. I didn't tell him what to do. "I want you to be able to live with yourself after tomorrow," I said. "Whatever that means for you." The wedding morning arrived wrapped in perfection. The venue gleamed. Music floated through the air. Guests arrived dressed in confidence and expectation. I took my seat quietly in the front row. Jessica was radiant. Patricia was composed. Gordon stood proudly, already greeting guests like a man welcoming people into a legacy he believed was unshakable. They thought the hierarchy was set. They thought the day belonged to them. As the ceremony time approached, I felt something settle in my chest, not fear, not anger, clarity. I watched Jessica and Patricia standing together near the aisle. I saw the way they leaned toward each other, whispering, smiling, laughing. I didn't know exactly what would be said. But I knew this much: people who grow confident in their cruelty eventually forget who might be listening. And when they do, they tend to reveal themselves all at once. The music was about to start. The guests leaned forward. And somewhere just behind me, my son took a breath, the kind you take right before you step into something that changes everything. The ceremony hadn't started yet, but everything was already in motion. Guests were seated. Phones were tucked away. The soft music playing in the background created the illusion that this was just another beautiful wedding about to begin. From the outside, it looked flawless. From the inside, something was cracking. I sat in the front row, hands folded in my lap, watching people take their places. Patricia stood near the aisle, scanning the crowd with practiced approval, nodding at familiar faces, adjusting details that didn't need adjusting. Jessica hovered nearby, radiant and restless, her smile fixed but her eyes sharp. Tyler stood at the front, waiting. I noticed his shoulders were tense, his posture too still. He wasn't nervous the way grooms usually are. He was alert. As if he were listening for something. That was when it happened. It was quiet enough that they thought it would stay that way. Patricia leaned toward Jessica, her voice low but not careful. Careless, really. The kind of carelessness that comes from confidence. She glanced in my direction and said, just loud enough for a few people nearby to hear, "That's not a mother, that's a mistake." Jessica laughed, not awkwardly, not nervously. She laughed easily. comfortably, as if it were an inside joke they'd shared many times before. For a split second, the world narrowed. I felt the words land not like a blow, but like confirmation. A sharp, clean understanding of who they were when they thought no one important was paying attention. I didn't move. Around me, a few heads turned. Someone inhaled sharply. Someone else looked down, pretending not to hear. And then I felt it. The shift. Tyler had heard it. I didn't see him turn at first, but I felt the air change when he did. When a person realizes something fundamental, their body reacts before their mind catches up. His shoulders straightened. His hands clenched once, then relaxed. He stepped away from where he was standing. The music faltered as he moved, confused musicians unsure whether to continue. A whisper rippled through the guests as Tyler walked, not rushed, not angry, toward the microphone set up near the aisle. Jessica noticed then. "Tyler," she said softly, still smiling. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer her right away. He tapped the microphone once. The sound echoed, sharp and final. The background music stopped completely. Every face turned toward him. "I need everyone's attention," Tyler said. His voice was calm. That was what unsettled people most. "I just heard something said about my mother," he continued. Something said loudly enough that it was meant to be dismissed as a joke. Patricia stiffened. Jessica's smile froze. Tyler looked directly at them. "You called my mother a mistake," he said, "and you laughed." A murmur spread through the crowd, not shock, recognition. The kind that happens when people realize a line has been crossed and there's no pretending otherwise. Jessica stepped forward, panic creeping into her voice. "Tyler, you're misunderstanding. It was nothing. We were just—" "Stop," he said quietly. The single word cut through her sentence cleanly. "My mother raised me alone," Tyler continued. "She worked, she sacrificed. She never once asked anyone to feel sorry for her, and she has been nothing but respectful to you and your family." Patricia moved toward him now, her composure cracking. "This is inappropriate," she snapped. "You're humiliating us in front of everyone." "No," Tyler said, "you did that yourselves." He took a breath. "I will not marry into a family that treats my mother with contempt. And I will not marry someone who laughs when that contempt is voiced." The silence that followed was absolute. Jessica dropped her bouquet. Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it again. Gordon stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "You're being dramatic," he said sharply. "You're throwing away everything we've offered you over a comment." Tyler turned to him slowly. "You offered me control disguised as opportunity," he said. "That's not generosity," Gordon scoffed. "You think you can do better?" Tyler didn't answer. "That was when I stood. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I simply rose from my seat and walked toward my son. Every step felt deliberate, grounded. He saw me coming and handed me the microphone without a word. I looked out at the crowd, people who had come expecting a ceremony, people who now realized they were witnessing something else entirely. "For those of you who don't know me," I said calmly, "I'm Tyler's mother." A pause. "I've been quiet today, and for many months before this, not because I didn't notice what was happening, but because I was paying attention." Patricia stared at me, her confidence finally gone. "You see," I continued, "there's a difference between being modest and being powerless, and confusing the two is a very expensive mistake." I handed the microphone back to Tyler. He looked at me once, his expression steady now, resolved. "I'm calling off the wedding," he said. "No shouting, no chaos, just truth." People began to stand. Some whispered, some stared. Jessica sank into a chair, stunned. Patricia looked around, searching for allies that weren't there. As we walked away together, I felt something settle, not relief, not triumph. Alignment. Behind us, the wedding unraveled. Ahead of us, consequences waited. And the people who thought they held all the power were only just beginning to understand how wrong they were. The wedding ended without an announcement. There was no formal conclusion, no music to guide people out, no polite applause to soften what had just happened. Guests stood in clusters, uncertain whether they were allowed to leave or expected to stay, whispering versions of the same question to one another. Did that really just happen? Tyler and I walked past them slowly. I could feel eyes on my back, feel the shift in how I was being seen, not as an afterthought anymore, not as someone to be dismissed. As we reached the edge of the terrace, Gordon finally caught up to us. "You can't just walk away," he said, his voice sharp with panic now. "There are people here. This is a disaster." Tyler stopped and turned to face him. This, he said calmly, is the result of your choices. Gordon scoffed, but the confidence behind it was thin. You're making a mistake. You think pride will replace everything we were offering you? Before Tyler could respond, I spoke. Gordon, I said, you've mistaken leverage for loyalty. He looked at me then, not with dismissal, but with calculation, as if seeing me clearly for the first time and not liking what he found. Patricia joined him, her voice tight. We can talk about this privately. There's no need to humiliate the family further. Humiliation, I replied, happens when people say what they really think out loud. Jessica hadn't moved from her chair. She stared straight ahead, her perfect image fractured, her confidence gone. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked small. We left. The drive home was quiet, not awkward, not heavy, just thoughtful. After a while, Tyler spoke. I didn't plan to do that, he said. I just couldn't stay silent anymore. I know, I said. That's how you know it was the right moment. That night, my phone started ringing, numbers I didn't recognize. Messages from distant relatives, friends of friends who had heard something and wanted clarification. I didn't answer. The next morning, the story had already started spreading. Not the version Patricia and Jessica would have preferred, but the one people tend to believe when there are too many witnesses. At 10 a.m., Gordon called. I need to speak with you, he said, skipping pleasantries. I'm sure you do, I replied, but today isn't a good day. There was a pause. This doesn't have to become bigger than it already is. I smiled to myself. It already is. By noon, Tyler received a message from Jessica, long, emotional. Apologetic in tone, but careful with responsibility. The word sorry appeared more than once. Accountability did not. He read it quietly, then set his phone down. She wants to talk, he said. That's your decision, I replied. Just remember, people apologize differently when they're afraid of consequences. By the afternoon, the second wave arrived. Gordon sent a formal message asking Tyler to come in to discuss his future at the company. The job offer. The opportunity that had been dangled like a reward. Tyler showed it to me. Do you still want it? I asked. He shook his head without hesitation. I don't want to owe my life to someone who thinks respect is conditional. That evening, we sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I taught him how to do homework, where we'd shared late dinners and quiet conversations after long days. I didn't know it would cost this much, he said quietly. It doesn't cost, I said, it reveals. The days that followed were strange. Patricia tried damage control. Jessica went silent. Gordon made calls, and slowly something shifted. People who had once echoed Patricia's tone became distant. Invitations were quietly rescinded. Conversations grew careful. Power has a way of rearranging itself when exposed. Tyler found temporary work on his own terms. He moved forward, not knowing exactly what came next, but certain of what he had left behind. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun drop behind the houses, he turned to me. I heard Gordon lost a deal, he said. Something fell through, I don't know details. I nodded, unsurprised. Things tend to unravel when people rely too much on intimidation, I said. Behind the scenes, conversations were happening. Doors were closing that Gordon didn't even know existed yet. And as the noise of the wedding faded into rumor, something far more significant began to take shape. The public humiliation had been just the beginning. The real consequences were quieter, and they were already in motion. By the end of the week, the shock had worn off. That's when the consequences began. At first, they arrived quietly, subtly. The way consequences usually do when they're earned over time instead of announced. Tyler noticed it before I did. He received a short email from Gordon, brief, formal, carefully worded. The job offer was being reconsidered. No explanation, no apology, just a withdrawal framed as a mutual decision that hadn't actually been mutual at all. Tyler didn't react the way I expected. He laughed once, softly. That's fine, he said. I didn't want it anymore. And that was the moment I knew he had already crossed the line they would never get him back across. Jessica called the next day. He didn't answer. She texted instead, then emailed. Each message a little more desperate, a little less polished than the last. She spoke about stress, misunderstandings, emotions running high. She didn't speak about respect. Patricia tried a different approach. She showed up at my house. I saw her car pull up and felt no rush to open the door. I finished my tea. I wiped the counter. I took my time. When I finally opened it, she stood there stiffly, her composure carefully rebuilt. This situation has gotten out of hand, she said without greeting. We need to speak like adults. We already are, I replied calmly. What you mean is that you need control back. Her lips tightened. You're enjoying this? No, I said, I'm understanding it. She took a breath. Jessica is devastated. Tyler humiliated her. Jessica laughed when you humiliated me, I replied. That was the moment this stopped being about feelings. Patricia's voice hardened. Families forgive, they don't destroy each other over words. Families don't test loyalty by cruelty, I said. She stared at me, searching for the version of me she thought existed. The small, grateful woman who would smooth things over and take blame to keep the peace. She didn't find her. This didn't have to go this way, Patricia said. It went the way you chose, I replied. She left without another word. After that, the silence grew. Jessica stopped calling. Gordon stopped messaging. Invitations disappeared, social circles shifted. And then quietly the stories started. Not the ones Patricia wanted told, but the ones people tell when they feel safe enough to be honest. About how Patricia spoke to service staff. About how Gordon handled negotiations. About how people who challenged them were quietly pushed aside. The wedding incident had given everyone permission to remember. One afternoon, Tyler came home with a folded paper in his hand. I didn't know if I should show you this, he said. It was a business newsletter. Buried near the back was a short article about a partnership Gordon had lost, one that had been considered secure. Tyler looked up. Do you think it's because of what happened? No, I said. It's because people were already watching, they just needed confirmation. That night, Tyler sat across from me thoughtful. I keep replaying it, he said. The moment she laughed, I know, I said. I don't miss her, he admitted. I miss who I thought she was. That's the hardest part, I said, mourning an illusion. As days turned into weeks, Tyler rebuilt quietly. He reached out to contacts on his own terms. He declined help that came with conditions. He chose independence even when it meant uncertainty, and I watched him change, not harden, but settle. One evening he asked, "Did you know this would happen?" I knew something would, I said. I just didn't know what shape it would take. What if I had stayed quiet? He asked. I met his eyes. Then you would have lost yourself long before you lost her. The last update came unexpectedly. A mutual acquaintance mentioned almost casually that Gordon was selling assets. Scaling back, restructuring, nothing dramatic. Just adjustments, but adjustments are what people make when their foundation starts to shift. Tyler nodded when I told him. I don't feel happy about it, he said. I just feel done. And that's when I realized something important. The damage wasn't the point. Clarity was. What happened at the wedding didn't destroy their family, it exposed it. And as the noise finally died down, something quieter took its place. A future no longer built on tolerance but on choice. And that was only part of what was still unfolding. The real shift didn't happen in public. It happened quietly in rooms without witnesses, in conversations that were never meant to circle back to me or my son. That's how real power moves without announcements. A few weeks after the wedding, Tyler came home one afternoon and sat down across from me without saying a word. He looked different, calmer, not relieved but resolved. I turned down another offer today, he said finally. Why? I asked. Because it came with expectations, he replied. The kind that sound generous until you read the fine print. I nodded. You're learning? What Tyler was learning, what I had learned long ago, was that control often arrives dressed as opportunity, and once you see it clearly, it's impossible to unsee. Jessica tried again around that time. A single message. Short. Direct, we need to talk. Tyler showed it to me and deleted it without replying. She doesn't want conversation, he said. She wants absolution. He was right. Meanwhile, Gordon's name kept appearing in places it hadn't before. Not in headlines, just in footnotes. Deals delayed, partnerships dissolved, quiet reshuffling. The kind of professional turbulence that doesn't make noise until it's already done damage. One afternoon, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years at the grocery store. We spoke briefly, politely. Then she leaned in and said, almost conspiratorially, I heard about what happened at the wedding. I waited. She lowered her voice. People are talking not just about that, about everything. I smiled politely and paid for my groceries. Later that night, Tyler asked, do you think they know what they lost? Eventually, I said. But by the time they understand it, it won't matter. Patricia reached out one final time. This time she was careful, polite, measured. She asked if we could meet, just the two of us. I agreed. We sat across from each other in a neutral place. No grand gestures, no audience. She looked tired. "This has gone far enough," she said. "Jessica is struggling, Gordon is under pressure. Families shouldn't be torn apart like this." I listened. "You raised Tyler well," she continued. "He's strong, but strength doesn't mean refusing compromise." "Compromise requires mutual respect," I replied. "You never offered that?" Her jaw tightened. "You could have corrected us quietly. You didn't have to let it happen the way it did." "I didn't let anything happen," I said. "You did." She leaned back, frustration breaking through. "So that's it. No forgiveness?" I considered her question carefully. "Forgiveness doesn't mean access," I said. "It means I no longer carry what you gave me." She left soon after. When I told Tyler about the meeting, he wasn't surprised. "They still think this is about winning," he said. "Yes," I replied. "And they still don't understand that the moment you stood up, the game ended." That night, Tyler admitted something quietly. "I think I would have married her if that moment hadn't happened." I didn't interrupt. "And I think," he continued, "I would have spent years convincing myself I was lucky." The weight of that hung between us. "Then the silence in that room did its job," I said. Time moved forward. Tyler found work aligned with his values. He built a life that didn't require apology. He stopped explaining himself to people who didn't listen. And as he did, the Walsh family faded from our daily lives, not through drama but through irrelevance. One evening, Tyler said something that stayed with me. "I don't feel angry anymore." "What do you feel?" I asked. "Clear," he said. That was when I knew the story had shifted. What began as an insult had become a turning point, not because someone was punished, but because someone finally chose himself, and that choice had set everything else in motion. Time has a way of revealing what noise tries to hide. By the third month after the wedding, that wasn't the story people whispered had changed. It was no longer about a dramatic ceremony or a public confrontation. It was about absence. About who wasn't showing up anymore. Jessica's name stopped coming up in conversations altogether. Invitations stopped including her family. Patricia's voice, once so present in every room, seemed to fade into the background. Gordon still existed in the professional world, but his presence no longer carried the weight it once had. Power doesn't disappear loudly, it dissolves quietly. Tyler noticed it too. One evening, we sat together after dinner, the kind of slow evening that invites honesty. He stared out the window for a long time before speaking. "I don't think I ever loved her the way I thought I did," he said. I didn't rush to respond. "I loved the idea that I had finally arrived somewhere," he continued. "That I had proven something, that I was enough for people who seemed important." I nodded. "That's not love. That's survival." He exhaled like he'd been holding that thought in for months. "I didn't realize how tired I was," he said. "Always measuring myself, always wondering if I was saying the right thing, wearing the right thing, being impressive enough." "What do you feel now?" I asked. "Lighter," he said, "and a little ashamed it took that moment to see it." "There's no shame in waking up," I replied. "Only in staying asleep." A few days later, Tyler made a decision he hadn't announced to anyone yet. He declined an invitation to a social event he would have once accepted without question, not because he had other plans, but because he didn't want to go. "That used to scare me," he admitted, "saying no without a reason." I smiled. "That's freedom." Around that time, word reached us indirectly, always indirectly, that Jessica had moved back in with her parents, that the polished life she'd projected was under strain, that Gordon was restructuring again. None of it surprised me. People who build identity on appearances struggle when appearances fail them. One afternoon, Tyler came home holding an envelope. "It came for you," he said. Inside was a formal letter, carefully worded, measured. It was from Gordon. He didn't apologize, he didn't explain. He wrote about closure, about moving forward, about letting go of misunderstandings. Tyler watched my face as I read it. "Well," he asked. "I won't respond," I said. "Why not?" "Because closure doesn't come from the person who caused the harm, it comes from the person who survived it." That night, Tyler asked something unexpected. "Did you ever feel invisible raising me alone?" I thought about it. "Yes," I said, "often." "And how did you handle it?" "I didn't wait for people to see me," I replied. "I made sure I could see myself." He nodded slowly. I think I'm finally doing that too. The seasons changed. Summer gave way to fall. The sharpness of what happened softened into something more reflective. One evening, Tyler said, I used to think standing up meant confrontation. And now, I asked. Now I think it means walking away without explaining. That was the moment I knew the lesson had landed. Not loudly, not perfectly, but completely. The wedding had ended something. But what followed was the beginning of a life that didn't require permission. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was settled. Months had passed by the time I realized I no longer thought about the wedding unless someone else brought it up. That was how I knew the story had truly ended, not because of forgiveness, not because of reconciliation, but because it no longer occupied space inside me. Tyler noticed it too. One morning, we sat at the kitchen table, sunlight cutting across the floor, the house calm in a way that felt earned. He was packing for a short trip, something work-related, something chosen on his own terms. I don't think about her anymore, he said, almost surprised. Not in anger, not even in regret. That's when you know you're free, I replied. He smiled. I used to think freedom meant winning. And now I think it means not needing to. Jessica's name came up one final time indirectly. Someone mentioned she had moved again, that things hadn't worked out the way she expected. There was no satisfaction in hearing it, just understanding. When people build their lives on comparison, they struggle when there's no one left to compare themselves to. Patricia never reached out again. Gordon's presence in our lives faded completely. His world continued, reshaped and smaller, but intact enough for him to survive. And that was important, because this was never about destruction. It was about boundaries. One evening, Tyler asked a question I hadn't anticipated. Do you think that moment was inevitable? I thought carefully before answering. I think, I said, when people are given enough space to believe they're superior, they eventually say something they can't take back. He nodded. And I think, he added, I needed to hear it. We sat with that for a while. Later that night, after Tyler had left, I stood alone in the living room, the same room Patricia once surveyed with quiet judgment. Nothing had changed physically. But everything had changed. I had raised a son who knew when to stand and when to walk away. A son who understood that loyalty doesn't require humiliation and love doesn't ask for silence. And that was enough. I thought about the woman I had been when this began, the one they mistook for small because she didn't announce herself, the one they believed could be dismissed without consequence. They were wrong, not because I fought back, but because I didn't need to. The wedding had been their stage, but life had been mine. And as I turned off the lights and closed the door for the night, I felt no anger, no need for the last word, only certainty. Because the most devastating response to disrespect isn't revenge, it's becoming unreachable, and that's where this story truly ends.